The train coughed black smoke into a pale sky as it hissed to a halt, wheels groaning like something in pain. Clara Jane Whitmore stepped down onto the cracked timber of the dusty platform in a borrowed white dress that didn't quite close at the back. She tugged her shawl tighter, pretending the strain in the seams was from the wind and not the curve of the child inside her. The town looked like it hadn't made up its mind whether to welcome her or spit her back out. A crooked sign read "Welcome to Dovetail," but its paint had peeled in every direction. The buildings leaned with age, and the people gathered with suspicion. Two men leaned against the telegraph post, chewing and spitting in rhythm. One narrowed his eyes at her belly. One chuckled low. She spotted him, Edgar Sim, standing apart from the others, clean boots and silver chain glinting across his vest. The man who'd ordered her. The man who had written an elegant, practiced script, "I seek a woman of sound character and moderate temperament to share my home and duties. I offer a tidy house, modest companionship, and decent future." He did not wave. His mouth twitched into something tight and displeased. His eyes dropped to her belly and froze there. It took only a breath to ruin everything. "You didn't say you were," he began, as she reached him. "I wasn't," she said softly. "Not when I boarded the train. He died before we reached Kansas. Fever." She swallowed. The baby lived. The crowd leaned in with their silence. Edgar looked her over like a purchase gone wrong. His lips curled. "You tricked me." "No. You lied." "I didn't." "You think I'll marry a ruined woman and raise another man's child?" His voice rose, sharp like a cracked whip. "You should have stayed on that train." Clara didn't flinch, though something inside her did. Something deep and lonely and full of rusted hope. Edgar turned to the gathering crowd and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I reject her." A few chuckles. A few gasps. One woman muttered, "Shameful." No one stepped forward. Clara set her carpetbag down on the plank floor. The handles left red welts on her hands. The baby kicked, sharp, anxious. She pressed her palm over her belly. "My husband's name was Elias Whitmore," she said quietly. "He died praying for our child. I came because I was hungry, not wicked." But it didn't matter. The wind carried shame louder than prayer ever could. Edgar turned his back. The station master cleared his throat. "Ma'am, you'll need to move along. I don't have return fare." "That's not my concern." The train's whistle howled again, long and pitiless. The iron beast wheezed and rolled forward, huffing toward the horizon. Clara didn't chase it. She stood on the splintered platform, one hand on her stomach, one on the worn bag, and watched the last safe thing in her life vanish in smoke. She walked until the town turned its back, too. Dovetail was all angles and eyes. It looked like a place that measured a woman by her dress and decided her worth by the silence of her past. Clara had neither luxury. She found a shaded spot behind the livery barn and sat on a crate that smelled of dung and hay. She picked burrs from her hem and counted the bruises blooming on her feet. The shoes had been tight before the baby. Now they pinched with punishment. The sun dropped low, amber sliding across the dirt. She watched it without blinking, as if it might apologize. A dog barked somewhere. A door slammed. She heard nothing kind. That night, no one asked if she had a place to go. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders and leaned against the barn wall. Sleep didn't come easy. The baby turned restlessly, pressing into her ribs like it, too, knew they weren't wanted. She dreamed of Elias, his hands rough but reverent, his laugh echoing in the hills. He had built her a cradle with his own calloused palms. He never saw it used. A gust of wind stirred her awake. The moon hung low and bruised. Her breath fogged in front of her lips. That's when she noticed it, a tin cup of water near her feet. Still steaming. She blinked. Looked around. No footsteps. No voice. Just the night breathing quietly. Next to it, folded carefully, was a frayed woolen blanket. Smelled of horses, smoke, and something clean. A gift without a giver. She stared at it as if it might vanish if she touched it. Then she wrapped herself in it, lips trembling more from shock than cold. By morning, it was gone, a cup, too. Nothing left but a faint indentation in the dirt where someone had stood. She tried to sell her brooch in town. The jeweler sniffed and said it was cheap metal. The grocer refused her coin. The preacher's wife told her the church was not a shelter for the consequence of sin. So Clara swept out behind the blacksmith's. She scrubbed water troughs. She picked nails from the ground and traded them into the tool shop for one apple, one biscuit. Her back ached. Her knees creaked. But her pride stayed stiff in her spine. She didn't know the name of the man who left the water. Not yet. But he left it again the next night. And again. Once, he left bread. Another time, a thick-cut bar of soap. Each gift wordless, anonymous, but deliberate. One night she said aloud, "Thank you," to the dark. No one answered. But in the distance, a forge flared gold for a moment longer than it needed to. Clara learned to read the town's silence. It thickened like mud. People stepped aside, not out of kindness but revulsion. Some whispered shameless under their breath. One man offered her $2 for something he wouldn't speak in daylight. She slapped him. The slap cost her the last scrap of goodwill. The next day, the sheriff leaned against her crate and said, "3 days, miss. Then you're off. Don't make me load you myself." She nodded. Not because she agreed, but because her soul had too many holes to argue anymore. That night, the stars came out sharp and cold. She talked to her child aloud. "You're not shame. You're mine." Then she whispered, "I'm scared, baby. I don't think anyone wants us." And in the silence after her words, the wind shifted. She turned. He stood there. A tall man in the dim. Worn boots. Long braid. Scar near his eye. Apache blood, she'd learn later. Name, Taza. He didn't come close. Didn't offer words. Didn't offer help. But he nodded once, as if to say, "I see you." Then walked away, vanishing into the night the way a ghost does, quietly and forever, unless it chooses otherwise. But Clara didn't sleep the same. Because that night, for the first time in too long, she felt seen. And somewhere inside her, hope stirred. The days stretched long and the nights longer, as if time itself refused to carry her forward. Clara spent the hours in the slant shadow behind the livery barn, pressing her hands to her back, trying to will away the pain in her spine. The baby had dropped lower. Her breath came harder now, and her feet swelled until the boots cut red rings around her ankles. No one spoke her name. Not the women who passed with laundry. Not the preacher who blinked past her like sunlight in his eyes. Not the boy who used to wave from his mother's porch and now only stared. But the water kept coming. Every dawn, a clean tin cup, still cold to the touch. Sometimes warm. Sometimes with a slice of lemon or a leaf of mint tucked inside, as if someone remembered what it was to be human. He never came close. She never saw him. But she began to sense his presence, not just in the cup, but in the air that shifted when she wasn't alone. Her skin would prickle. A breeze would change. The mule in the paddock would lift its ears. She began talking aloud. Just little things. Bits of her past, confessions she hadn't meant to say. "My real name's not even Clara Jane," she murmured one morning, biting into a biscuit someone had traded her for sweeping the saloon porch. "It's Clara Jean. But folks said the French made it sound fast." No reply. "You were right, though," she added softly, glancing toward the forge across the way. "They don't care what your name is. Just how small you'll let them make you." That day she swept the blacksmith's step on instinct. Not out of obligation. Out of thanks. A silent exchange. The forge beat like a slow heart in the early dusk, hammer to iron, flame to shape. Inside, she could see the outline of a man, tall and wide-shouldered, moving like someone who didn't waste gestures. Firelight caught the braid along his back, the deliberate patience in his arms. His silence held weight, as though he'd learned long ago that words could lie, but actions wouldn't. She heard someone call him once, Taza. They said it low, like a secret. She watched him from behind her shawl. He walked like a man used to carrying burdens heavier than steel. When he met a man's gaze, it was steady. When he looked at a child, he softened just enough to be noticed. But he never looked at her. Not directly. One afternoon, two women passed her in front of the store. One said, "It's disgusting, her showing like that." The other whispered, "I heard he leaves her food. Like a stray dog." Clara felt her throat clench. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. She stood straighter. She didn't run. She wouldn't. Later that night, the water came again. But this time a piece of cloth wrapped around 2 boiled eggs, a heel of cornbread, and a small folded note. She opened it with trembling fingers. "You're not filth. You're fire. Eat." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Clara pressed the note to her chest and breathed in the scent of smoke and iron still on it. For the first time in weeks, she smiled, small, crooked, but real. She tried to return the gesture. The next day she left a flower wild clover in the empty cup. It was gone by sunrise. That morning, she found a worn leather strap beside the cup. It fit around her back and helped her carry her belly better. She wore it like armor, even when the townsfolk stared harder. One of the boys threw a stone that grazed her arm. She didn't flinch. Didn't cuss. Just looked at him, still and quiet, until he turned and ran. She tended to a wounded kitten the next day. Cleaned its paw. Gave it some crumbs. Set it near the smithy's fence. Taza left her a small tin of salve in return. No words. Just the deed. The understanding between them grew wordless and warm. He taught her how to survive without touching her hand, how to feel seen without ever hearing her name from his lips. She noticed the things others didn't. He never turned away from the dying. A mare giving birth in pain, he stayed until she stood. A dog struck by wagon, he buried it himself. He mended shoes for children who couldn't pay. Let old women rest in his shade when the sun burned too high. But he never joined a table. Never lingered in company. And yet, for her, he stayed. Not near. But present. A flicker at the edge of everything solid. Like a tree you don't notice until you need its shade. One evening, storm clouds broke over the town. Rain spilled like a confession. Her lean-to barely held. The wind screamed between planks. She crouched, teeth chattering, the blanket soaked through. Thunder cracked the sky open. She closed her eyes and braced for the collapse. Then a knock. Not loud. Just 3 knocks on the post. She opened the flap and saw a tall figure standing beneath a white oilskin cloak, holding a second in his hand. No words. No face shown. Just the silent offer. Clara took it. Their hands touched for half a second. His skin was warm. Calloused. Strong. By the time she blinked again, he was gone. She wore the cloak all night. It smelled like him, metal, wood smoke, earth. The baby kicked hard the next morning. She laughed. The sound startled her. A woman came by that afternoon and said coldly, "You think you've trapped him? An Indian can't raise your child. Even if he's foolish enough to try." Clara said nothing. Just returned to folding the iron hooks for the stable wall. But her silence this time was different. It was proud. When her back hurt too much to sleep, she sat by the forge, watching from afar. One night, he looked up just once and their eyes locked. It was like two people remembering something they'd never lived, just known. The next morning, the sheriff found her sitting on the crate with her hands pressed around her belly, humming a tune only she and the baby knew. "You're still here," he said. "I am." "You know what they say?" She didn't answer. They say he's got no business protecting you. That he's not even Christian. Clara met his gaze and said softly, "Funny. He's the only man I've met who acts like Christ." The sheriff didn't reply. Just tipped his hat and left her be. The sky turned warm that week. The sun settled soft on her shoulders. The forge glowed longer. Taza worked slower. One day she brought him water. Set it down on his anvil before he returned. Inside the cup, a note. "I see you too." She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. That night, he left no water. He left a chair. Pulled beside his porch. For her. The bells tolled just after dawn, 3 sullen peals echoing across Dovetail's dust-bitten roofs, and by breakfast, Clara knew they were for her. They gathered under the eaves of the church like crows. Pale bonnets, stiff collars, lips pursed with righteousness. Someone had gone to the sheriff. Someone else had stirred the preacher. By morning, the matter of Clara Jane Whitmore was not one of gossip, it was civic burden. They didn't invite her. She came anyway. She stood at the edge of the wood-planked crowd, arms folded beneath the swell of her belly, shoulders hunched beneath the blacksmith's cloak she still wore. It swallowed her whole, but she wore it like armor, like belonging stitched between each fraying seam. The preacher was the first to speak. "We have among us a case of moral ambiguity turned public shame," he began, though his eyes never quite landed on hers. A woman in the front row added, "An indecency. She carries a bastard and lives in sin." Clara didn't blink. Another voice, "She's not a wife. Not a widow. Not even a proper bride. Just walked into town like a stray and expects shelter, sympathy, and mercy. That child'll have no name, and no father, and no prayer. And she's living on Taza's land now, God help him." A ripple of low agreement hummed through the circle. The sheriff cleared his throat. "There's talk she's refusing to leave by the time given." Clara stepped forward then. Not far. Just one step. Her voice didn't shake. "I have no family left. No means to travel. I sweep where I can, so when I'm asked. I don't steal. I don't lie. And I haven't once asked a soul here for a thing." She looked them in the eye, those hard, sun-worn eyes that never soften for strangers. Except for room to breathe. Someone spat. Another crossed their arms tighter. The preacher said, "Grace is not a shelter for rebellion, Miss Whitmore." "She's dangerous," muttered a man in the back. "To the children. To the town's reputation. It's not decent." Then the crowd shifted. Bootsteps, firm and deliberate, split the silence like a clean blade. Taza appeared beside her, not summoned, not explained, not decorated in apology. Just there, like a wall that hadn't asked for permission to stand. He didn't speak right away. Just stood tall, arms folded over his chest, eyes trained not on them but on her. When he finally did speak, it was to the sheriff. "She stays." 3 words. Final, not loud, but thunder carried less weight. The sheriff raised a brow. "She's not your wife, Taza. That child ain't yours. She stays." "You claim her, then?" Taza didn't flinch. "I protect her." A murmur rose like rising dust. Someone hissed, "That's no answer." Another muttered, "Savage fool." Taza stepped forward, but not toward them, toward her. He turned so he stood just slightly in front of Clara, blocking the wind, the eyes, the slurs. "I protect her," he said again, louder now, "because no one else will. And because I choose to." No one challenged him. No one dared. They broke apart by mid-morning, not with peace but with exhaustion. The church door stayed shut. The preacher muttered scripture that no one remembered. But word traveled, and by sunset, the town had decided something else. Clara was no longer just unfit. She was now his problem. The blacksmith's porch became hers. The lean-to was torn down by his own hand. He left her a space inside, cot near the window, shelf for her sewing, fire that never quite died even when no one tended it. He built a railing on the porch for her belly to lean against. He didn't ask. He didn't wait for thanks. When she tried to speak it, he waved her off. "Don't thank me for what's owed." "You owe me nothing," she said. "I don't owe you. I owe a world that's been cruel." He returned to his work, but his hammer didn't strike as hard. That evening, Clara poured 2 mugs of coffee and set one beside him without a word. He drank it slow. Neither of them smiled. But the silence between them shifted, less like distance, more like shelter. Days passed. She swept the forge floor, boiled potatoes, repaired his shirts with neat invisible stitches. He paid her in lumber for the cradle she would build, in dried venison, in safe sleep. He spoke in fragments. "You sleep too much. Baby's coming soon." She nodded. "Hurts in my hips. I'll fetch salve." He did. Without her asking. At night, she sat on the porch and watched the wind weave through the grass. He would join her sometimes. Say nothing. Just exist nearby like something carved from stone and memory. Then came the preacher again, weeks later. Alone. He knocked soft on the door. Taza wasn't home. Clara opened it with caution. "Child," the man said, "I came to offer you mercy. You can still give the babe to a better home. Be cleansed. Begin again." Clara stared at him like he was something fragile and far away. "This child," she said, "is not a mistake. He's what I have left of the only man who loved me kindly. You carry death's shadow, girl. Do you want that child to grow up beneath it?" She stepped back and pointed. "That man over there, Taza, he's never touched me. Never once asked anything of me. And yet he's done more good by staying quiet than all your sermons combined." The preacher left red-faced. Taza returned to find her breath shaking. He didn't ask what happened. Just watched her from the doorway, then said, "Come sit." They sat by the fire, both too tired for explanation. "You scare them," she said finally. "I know. Why help me?" "Really?" He looked at her then, not just her face, but her, like someone seeing past the bruises, the dirt, the broken pride. "Because I was once the child they wouldn't take in." She looked down. Tears slipped quietly. "Then we're alike." Taza didn't touch her. He simply stood and added another log to the fire, as if saying warmth was the answer. When she climbed into bed that night, she wept into the pillow not out of sorrow, but out of something else. A word she didn't dare name yet. That word grew louder a week later when she saw what he'd built behind the forge, a rocking chair, shaped by hand. Not fancy. Just honest. Smoothed corners, wide enough for mother and child. He didn't tell her. Just let her find it. She sat in it at twilight and rocked, hands over her belly, whispering stories of what could be. Then, just after the moon rose high, a wagon rolled into town. And from it stepped the man she'd nearly forgotten how to fear. Edgar Sim. Back. With papers. With intent. And with eyes that hadn't forgotten rejection. Clara watched him through the rising steam of the forge, his back to her, every movement slow and exact. He worked as if the world demanded precision to remain whole. Each strike of his hammer was a thought made visible. Each breath seemed timed between fire and silence. She still didn't know his full name. Just Taza, the name she'd heard past the lips of a store boy, half whispered and not repeated. He hadn't spoken it himself. Hadn't offered it. And she hadn't asked. Not yet. Instead, she learned him in pieces. She learned the way he tested iron with his thumb, not to feel heat but weight. She learned he didn't drink, didn't smile, didn't ever raise his voice. She learned that at dusk, when the rest of the world seemed to sigh, he sat with a piece of cedar in his lap and carved it down, inch by inch, until it became something small and sacred: buttons, hooks, once a bird. She learned that he'd once broken his hand defending a boy from a soldier. That he'd built the town's bridge and never signed it. That he read slow but remembered everything he read. She learned that when she cried at night quietly, facing the wall, he never asked why. but he added more wood to the fire. She began to hum while she worked. Low lullabies from her mother, from another place. He didn't stop her. He listened. And then, one evening, as she stirred stew beside the hearth, he said, "That tune. Is it from where you're from?" She nodded. "My mother sang it when she was alone." He didn't look at her. Just said, "Sounds like something from before." The words struck her not for their mystery, but for their understanding. Later, when she handed him a bowl, their hands touched. Briefly. His skin was rougher than she imagined. She felt a pulse in her fingers long after he let go. The town whispered louder now. That she had bewitched him. That he'd claimed her in secret. That no decent man would choose a used woman unless she carried a spell on her tongue. She ignored them. Taza ignored them. But still, the space between them grew smaller. Not with touch. With trust. He let her polish his tools. Mend his gloves. He let her rake coals and feed the mule and wipe blood from his hand when a nail bent wrong and split his skin. He never winced. She did. That night she asked, "Does anything hurt you?" He said, "Once." "Who hurt you?" He didn't answer. Just said, "They're all buried." And she understood not to ask again. In the mornings, she sat on the steps and drank from the same cup he did. She salted meat and lined the cradle with soft cloth torn from her old dress. The child kicked often now, as if impatient. She began talking to it while he worked, telling it stories of the man with hands like thunder but a voice like wind. She tried saying his name once aloud, practicing. It stuck in her throat like a prayer. Then came the day her legs gave out in the yard. She'd bent too quickly. The world spun and the sky dropped sideways. Taza caught her before the ground did. He didn't panic. Didn't speak. He lifted her gently, as if she were already broken, and carried her into the cabin, laid her down on the bed he never used, and turned away while she breathed through the pain. When she opened her eyes, he was there, sitting in the corner, knife in hand, whittling quietly. "You should rest." She studied him through the low light. "That your bed?" "Yes." "You don't sleep in it." "No." "Why not?" "I gave it to you." Her heart fluttered, not fast. Deep. Later, he brought her tea with crushed mint. Laid it by her hand without words. She reached out and touched his fingers, just for a breath. "Thank you." He met her eyes then. And said her name. First time. "Clara." The sound was quiet, reverent, like the first snowfall. Like something spoken in a dream before waking. She almost cried. Instead, she smiled. "Say it again." "Clara." The wind pushed the shutter open. It closed again on its own. The forge went dark early that night. The next morning, the town didn't speak to her. It glared. But no one came near the forge. Not anymore. The preacher passed with a tight mouth. The sheriff didn't look her way. But two children left apples by the rail and ran off laughing. She carved their initials into the wood to remember. Then, just as the sun dipped, a wagon rolled in. Dust curled around its wheels like smoke. It came slow. Purposeful. She felt the knot in her throat before she saw his face. Edgar. He hadn't aged, only hardened. The same sneer. The same boots. The same voice, thick with ownership. "You look fatter," he said. "Guess carrying shame will do that." Taza stepped into view from the side of the cabin. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Edgar held up a folded paper. "I've brought a claim. The child's mine by right of marriage promise. I got a judge to say so. I paid." Clara stood her ground. "You rejected me." "I never signed no refusal." "Makes you property, not widow." "You don't own me. You carry what's mine." Taza moved forward then. One slow step. Edgar barked a laugh. You gonna fight me, red man? You think a half-breed can stand in front of law? Taza took the paper from Edgar's hand. Didn't read it. Burned it. Right there, over the lamp's flame. The fire flared and the parchment crumpled into black curls. Edgar's face turned the color of dried blood. This ain't over, he hissed. Taza replied, calm as winter, then come back ready to bury something. Edgar left with the air around him coiled like a whip. The night held still after. Taza didn't look at her. She walked to him. Stood close. Put her hand on his. I don't care if you're half, or whole, or broken. He looked down at her belly, then to her face. You don't owe me. I know, she whispered. I'll be there, he said. When the time comes. Then added softly, if you want me. She stepped closer, forehead to his chest. I already do. The first contraction came just after midnight. A deep pull, low and hard, like something ancient was shifting inside her, trying to remember the way out. Clara pressed both hands to the doorframe, breathing through clenched teeth, her shawl damp with sweat though the room was cold. Outside, the town lay hushed under a sky thick with stars. Wind scratched at the shutters. A coyote howled once, far off. Nothing moved in Dovetail but the slow ache of time and the sound of her pain building, cresting, refusing to break. Taza was already awake. He didn't speak. He just lit the lantern, rolled up his sleeves, and began boiling water. He laid down blankets, took out the carved spoon for her to bite if she needed. He didn't panic. He didn't ask if she was sure. He just stayed. She labored in silence, kneeling on the rug, head bowed like in prayer. Her fingers found the edge of the hearthstone and held on. This wasn't supposed to happen like this, she whispered. He knelt beside her. How was it supposed to happen? With a name, she said. With a husband. A doctor. A cradle not built by pity. He turned her face toward him then, gently, without demand. You think pity can carve wood this carefully? A tear slipped down her cheek. He wiped it away with his thumb. Then the pain surged again, and she doubled forward, and the room filled with her breath breaking and her body rising to do the one thing left it was meant for. Hours passed. Time blurred. The child came into the world wrapped in blood and grit and grace. A girl. Small, but loud. Taza wrapped her in cloth and laid her on Clara's chest without a word. Just reverence. His hands trembled then, not from fear, but awe. She's beautiful, Clara whispered. She looks like Elias. Taza said nothing. But when the baby opened her eyes and blinked at the flickering lantern, he smiled, soft, almost invisible. She's not mine, he said. No, Clara agreed. But you still stayed. He brushed a finger along the baby's cheek. Because she is yours. And that was enough. But the peace did not last. By sunrise, the sheriff came riding fast, hat low, face drawn tight. Clara, he called from the yard, not loud but urgent. Taza opened the door before she could rise. There's trouble, the sheriff said. Edgar's coming back. And he ain't alone. Behind him, dust rose on the road, 2 wagons, 3 men, 1 judge. Townsfolk gathering. Some curious. Some angry. Some just bored. Edgar climbed down from the first wagon like a man stepping onto his own land. His coat was pressed. His voice already raised. I warned you, he said, pacing. You stole from me. That child is mine by word and by law. You can't hide behind a half-breed forever. The judge, old, paid, barely awake, nodded solemnly. Paperwork's right here, Edgar said. She carries the child of a promised man. That makes the girl his ward. His property. She is not property, Clara said from the doorway, voice thin but firm. Edgar sneered. You think tears and afterbirth can change that? Taza stepped forward. Edgar laughed. What will you do, Indian? Fight the law? Or die like the rest of your kind? The town held its breath. Then Taza did something no one expected. He walked to the church. Straight through the crowd. Into the wooden steps and into the sanctuary. He laid something down on the pulpit. A bundle. Old medals. Strips of uniform. A crumpled letter marked by fire. A woman from the back gasped. The preacher stepped forward, slowly. He was a scout, he said aloud. For the Union. Saved 12 white men from a Confederate raid in '64. Got shot twice and kept writing. Buried men who cursed his name. He picked up the letter. Discharged without pension. Refused entry to Veterans Hall. Lived out here ever since. The town shifted. Clara stood holding her child to her chest. Taza spoke then, voice steady. I killed no man who didn't draw first. I never took what wasn't offered. I never claimed more than my place in this dirt. He turned toward Edgar. But I will not give her to you. She's not yours, Edgar spat. Taza nodded. But you left her to starve. That makes her mine. The judge opened his mouth, then closed it. Clara stepped forward, cradling the baby. Her voice shook, but her words were fire. You left me on a train platform with nothing but a name and a bruise. This man fed me. Sheltered me. Stood between me and everything cold in this world. She looked to the crowd. He never touched me. Never once. But I have never felt safer. A pause. Then the preacher stepped forward. I'll sign no paper against this man, he said. And no church will bless a thief like Edgar. A murmur. Then silence. Edgar took a step forward, jaw clenched. You think this is over? Taza met his eyes. If you come again, bring more than words. Bring a grave. Edgar paled. The sheriff laid a hand on his pistol. The judge climbed into the wagon. And the whole show rolled out, with dust and curses, leaving only the people and their shame behind. Taza didn't speak. He just turned to Clara and nodded once. And for the first time, she took his hand. That night, she sat on the porch in the rocking chair he built. The baby slept against her chest. The moon was full. Crickets sang in the grass. Taza came out and sat beside her. Neither said a word. Not for a long time. Then she spoke, barely a whisper. I don't know how to thank you. He looked ahead, not at her. Then don't. Just stay. She smiled. And rocked. And the fire inside the cabin never went out. Not that night. Not for many nights after. And though he wasn't the child's father, he fought like one.